Welcome to Generation Next, a live event series presented by Ad Age in partnership with Facebook. I'm John Dioso, the editor of Ad Age Studio 30. Generation Next features in-depth discussions on the importance of improving diversity, equity, and inclusion in the industry. Today's episode will feature a conversation between Judy Tolan, VP and Head of Scaled Solutions, Global Business Marketing at Facebook, and Sadie Novello, Chief Content Officer at Giphy. Judy and Sadie will be discussing how to be your own advocate, finding ways to tell your own story and celebrate your achievements. But before I toss it to Judy and Sadie, I'd like to take a moment to update everyone on the progress of the list and its mentorship program, the eponymous Generation Next. It's been quite a journey for the list in the 3 years since former Ad Age publisher Josh Golden and Shauna Sweeney, the global head of industry and community marketing at Facebook, came up with the idea to gather Ad Age award winners and charge them with coming up with workable solutions to fix some of the biggest challenges facing the industry. The 2019 list chose equitable family leave as its mission, and if you've been paying attention to ongoing congressional negotiations on Build Back Better legislation, that issue is as timely as ever. The 2020 list dedicated itself to addressing the diverse talent crisis by creating a mentorship program that specifically catered to mid-career professionals with roughly 3 to 5 years experience, because the group reasoned that was the point when so many people of color were dropping out due to lack of advancement, opportunities, and guidance. And everyone involved with the list, from the members to Ad Age to our partners at Facebook, believed so strongly in this mission that when we decided to maintain it when we recruited the 2021 list. Together, the 2020 and 2021 classes of the list launched the Generation Next mentorship program in the spring, partnering with Management Leadership for Tomorrow and the Asian American Advertising Federation to recruit mentees. As the culmination of the program, the mentees split up into groups to come up with campaigns to spread the message of the importance of mentorship to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion. Representatives of each group appeared at Advertising Week on the virtual stage of our friends at the Female Quotient to discuss their projects, as well as the valuable lessons they've learned from their list members along the way. And as we start planning for next year's list and building on the progress the mentees, mentors, and list members made this past year, I can't think of a better person to call on for this episode of Generation Next than list member, mentor, project director, and overall powerhouse, Sadie Novello, Chief Content Officer at Giphy. Hey, Sadie. And my Generation Next partner who helped launch a series way back in February, Judy Tolan, VP and Head of Scaled Solutions, Global Business Marketing at Facebook. I'm looking forward to a terrific conversation. Audience members, please let us know where you're watching from so we can give you a shout out later. Judy, take it away.
Well, thank you, John. That was just a lovely update and introduction, and I'm just excited to be here with Sadie. So, Judy Tolan, Vice President in our Global Business Marketing org at Facebook, and this is just a timely topic. Learning to advocate for yourself, not only to help you yourself grow your career and succeed, but also develop the skills that you need to overcome all types of challenges is imperative. So, what does all this mean? How do you get started? I'd love to dive in on this exact topic, Sadie. So are you ready?
Let's do it. We're ready.
All right. I love the enthusiasm. So first, off the bat, what does it mean to, be a self-advocate? What does that really mean? And I'd love to get a bit more of your insight on that topic.
Yeah, self-advocacy in my mind is really around understanding what you need or want. I think it's universally applicable. I think it's applicable to relationships, to family, to boundaries, and to work. And, being a self-advocate really means being in touch with your personal needs, making sure that you are defending them, requesting them. And obviously it's iterative, right? An entry-level employee self-advocates differently than a senior executive, but every step of the way, there's a version of self-advocacy and making sure that you're being true to yourself and your needs that matters.
I love that. I mean, so tell me, how have you learned over your very storied and successful career to advocate for yourself?
I kind of came out of the womb advocating for myself. I consider myself pretty lucky that way. But there's two determining factors, one of which does stem from birth, which is I was raised with means. And it's something that people don't really like to talk about. But because I was raised in an environment where I had a family with resources, I had this backstop that allowed for my confidence to grow in a way that most of the world does not have. And so I went to a very progressive school. We called our teachers by their first names. I had dinners with my family and celebrities and people that I learned to talk to anybody and have a voice at any table. And that is an incredibly privileged place to come from and an incredibly lucky environment to be born into. But it also taught me that consequences were not the same for me as for others. And so it's one of the reasons why I like talking about this so much, is because I want to make sure that the privilege that I was given and granted by no, reason, no earning of my own, is carried forth so that those lessons can go to others. And really that comes back to this confidence, this feeling of having security. And, in fact, at one point I lost our savings through no fault of our own. And, I suddenly looked at my husband and said, "Oh my God, now I have to work." And he just like deadpanned me and was like, "Yeah, princess, like welcome." Like just be glad I didn't marry you for your money. Like, let's do this. Come on. So that to me is the first determining factor. The second, I mention all the time, I had a baby in college. And so I have always been a working mother. I had to advocate for my needs as a mother. I had to advocate for my daughter's needs. And I made choices like working close to her school so that I could run over and serve hot lunch, or, but I didn't walk in the door or interview by asking for those things. I just iteratively kind of found ways to self-advocate for myself, starting with serving hot lunch twice a month, going into, coaching soccer and leaving at 5 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock. And over time, I learned that proving your value and then advocating for yourself in an iterative manner is the most, for me, effective way to get what you need.
I love that. I love the fact that, you acknowledged the privilege that you had, but leaned into it, right? And a lot of that privilege is all about the knowledge, and then making sure that you leverage your place of privilege to help others. And I'm just curious though. You said whether it be going over to serve hot lunch or leaving early to go to soccer games, there may be people watching where they don't feel like they can do that. What you had that inner confidence? Did you have people that were emulating that for you, so you felt comfortable to do those and make those decisions? I was just curious.
I did, in the sense that my mother is afraid of nothing. I mean, she is a
Mm.
Renaissance woman who has changed careers 1,000 times. She picked up and moved from Arizona to New York with $15 in her pocket, and she has that same confidence. So I did learn part of it from her. And then the other piece of that is I've always found that if I have proved my value, right? So my mom used to always say, don't tell the cab driver where you're going when you're standing outside the cab. Get into the cab and then tell them where you're going, right? So you hear a lot about this entitled generation, or you see these articles about entitled kids like asking for all these things. And what I found is most of the time when I hear these stories, it happens in the interview process. And that to me is a mistake, right? When you're interviewing, you're being judged by a caliber that is preset. And there's nothing I want more than the person to be interviewing to be the last person I have to interview, right? Like, I want you to come in and nail it, and I don't have to interview anymore because I've got the superstar I need. And so once you come in and you prove your value to me, if you're going to say, listen, I volunteer here, or we have a woman in Giphy Studios who wanted to take a puppeteering class, and she's a Black female. She had this opportunity through Jim Henson. She did a phenomenal job spending weeks doing this Jim Henson program. And when she came back and talked to us about it and talked to us about the meaning of what it meant to her to be in a room with other Black women and Black men and other people of color doing this thing, right? And the fact that Giphy is the type of environment that allows for that, and the fact that she was comfortable coming to us and we knew that she could do it while doing her day job. She didn't come into the interview saying, I have to split my time between this and Jim Henson. She's been here a few years. She has earned that self-advocacy, which I think is sometimes lost in translation when people talk about all this entitlement. This entitlement and self-advocacy, people see it as a fine line. It's not as fine as I think people see it as.
I love that, and kudos to her. I mean, Jim Henson puppeteering. I mean, I would love to
She's
like.
incredible.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she's incredible. She's done an incredible job. She made a puppet of herself. She was at
Oh
Knott's
my
Berry
god.
Farm over the weekend. I mean, Donnie Jefferson, huge shout out. She is the future.
Yes, shout out to you. Keep doing magic like that. That's amazing. And I think you're right. The timing of when you probe and offer up these things is important. But understanding the culture of the organization that you're joining is imperative. And those are the type of questions you might want to ask early on in the interview process. So, I'd love to go in maybe in a bit more potentially provocative direction. Tell me.
I love provocative.
I know, so do I. I love that as well. So, what does being professional in a corporate environment mean to you?
As I sit here in my hoodie, I hate the term professional. I think it's it's a loaded term. It's antiquated, and it's just kind of a stupid term. When I worked in Yahoo, I used to sit in my cube barefoot all the time. I'm barefoot right now. I always take my shoes off. It's a weird quirk. It's a quirk. I love being barefoot. When I worked at a high-powered entertainment executive executive, I kept my shoes on, right? So this idea of professionalism as an entity is antiquated, but the idea of reading the room is not, right? So, knowing who you're talking to, knowing what their expectations, hopefully those expectations are grounded in things that are not misogynistic or racist or a lot of the other problems that we have with this term professional. But, my husband and I were sitting in New York probably a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. I mean, time doesn't really exist anymore, but it was at some point in the past. And I had just been promoted to my C-level position. And I'm there in my hoodie and my beanie like I am every day. And he's in his 3-piece suit going off to do sales meetings in New York. And he just looked at it and he said, "I'm so proud of you. Like, you absolutely made yourself you earned the C-level position being exactly who you are." He's like, "The odds are not in your favor for that to happen. And I don't know why I'm sitting here in a 3-piece suit and you get to be in a hoodie and a beanie, but good for you." And that to me speaks volumes. But that's also because it's Giphy. That's also because of the culture that's been born there. That wouldn't happen in a lot of environments. And so I'm not naive to that. But now Giphy has 100 plus employees or more who have come through this system and this culture, who now have a responsibility to carry those cultures forward. So my request to this audience, my request to the leaders in the list, among other places, is carry that culture forward. Make sure that you are allowing for people to be judged by merit and not by whether or not they wear high heel shoes. Because I promise you, I would not have a single promotion if I had to wear high heeled shoes.
Look, I hear you. I mean, look, it is all around making sure that people can bring their most authentic selves to work, because when they do that, they tend to perform better, and it's just better for business, right? To your point, timing and audience and knowing your audience and time and place. But when employees get in these environments that you described, like Giphy, and definitely here at Facebook as well, now Meta, is this whole idea around that we want you to bring your whole authentic self together, to work, and to bring it to your culture and to your office, and it just enriches everyone's experience. And I have found, to your point, once you have experienced one of these office cultures or these company cultures, you can't put that genie back in a bottle. It just
no way.
It's not
nor
possible.
should you, right?
No, exactly.
Yeah, nor should you.
Exactly.
I've also found that a lot of times some people can't adjust to it, right? There are some people that are so married to this antiquated model that they don't succeed in a culture like that. And they need a culture that has more of this, antiquated version. And that's okay, because that's all sort of generational and will eventually, hopefully, grow out. But I haven't worked in finance. I know the things that people face in finance are very different from digital media. I really see digital media as an area that is paving the way for this. I wanted to be a sitcom writer before I had my daughter, and I made the choice to not do that because the hours worked was not feasible for having a child that age. But, over time, I would hope that this spreads. And, I chose digital media for those reasons. And hopefully digital media will then lead the way for a lot of other professions and disciplines, so that people start to understand the value of culture and making sure it's a friendly environment. Because every study, I don't have to tell you this, Judy, but every study shows that diversity in the workplace matters. And why I love Generation Next and why I love being a part of this program is it gives us the opportunity to make sure that we are clearing the path, so that this sort of like ages out. It sort of disappears over time. And the only way we can do that is by leading.
I love that. I love that. So well spoken. So I'm going to send it back to John real quick for just a check-in.
Thanks, Judy, and thanks, Sadie. What a great conversation so far. If you're just joining us, this is Generation Next, a live event series presented by Ad Age Studio 30 in partnership with Facebook. I'm John Dioso, the editor of Ad Age Studio 30, and Judy Tolan, VP and Head of Scale Solutions, Global Business Marketing at Facebook, and Sadie Novello, Chief Content Officer at Giphy, are discussing how to be your own advocate. Before we get back to the Q&A, I just want to say hi to some people who have been joining us from all around the world. We've got Corey from California. Hey, Corey. Philippa from Portugal. Natalie from New York, and Sherelle from Florida. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Let me throw it back to you. I don't want to get out of the way of this great conversation. Go ahead, Judy.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Portugal. Wow, that's awesome. I love to see the global nature of our audience. So let's keep this going. I mean, Sadie, I'd love to know, how do you suggest for those watching, does one bring the fullness of their skill set to interviews or to presentations? How is this important? What are ways that you can translate, like maybe you're a data and analytics person or a highly creative person. How do you bring it to your interviews to show your full self?
So interesting, because you used exactly the right word, which is skill set. I talk about this ad nauseum to people, right? This idea of having your thesis for who you are and what you can bring is the single most important piece of advice for interviewing. So for me, I triage and fix problems. That can be at Giphy, that can be at an insurance agency, that can be at a nonprofit. Like, the point is, that is my skill set. I'm a people manager, right? I am good at managing people and helping them, get through a system so that they can get promoted, be skilled, etc. So I don't talk about past work history. My resume is varied and all over the place. It's not always a single line directly from what I used to be doing to what I'm doing now, but that thesis of what I do has served me really well. And so one of the funniest things that happens so consistently is when I talk to people, they say, I don't want to apply for that job because I don't think I'll like it, or I don't think I'm right for it. And what I say every time is, how do you know? You read a job description that somebody cobbled together, right? And you don't know the culture, you don't know your boss, you don't know anything. And you don't have to talk yourself out of the job before you even know what it is. Go have the interview, go see. And find out. You can say no at the point of an offer if it's not the right thing. You are entitled to go through the process. So going into those interviews, this whole idea for this talk actually comes from my now college age daughter. Now I'm telling everyone how old I am because I said I had her in college, and now she's a senior in college somehow. Her friend was bombing all of her interviews. And I know the girl, she's wildly smart and wildly capable, great work ethic, and she couldn't land a job. And so I said, you're going to do an interview with me, and we're going to do it the real way. Like, I am going to pretend like I don't know you and really hone in on what you're doing incorrectly. Now, she was extremely nervous, twirling her hair, doing all of these things, and was bombing the interview with me as well. So afterwards, when I gave her notes, I gave them to her. But what was most important is that context for the role matters. If I was talking to somebody who was applying for an engineering position, and that engineering position was really pretty isolated and their success was determined by a work product, that's very different than what she was applying for, which is a client-facing account manager in a PR firm. So if I'm watching somebody who can't make eye contact, gets nervous when they're under fire, and I'm thinking about them sitting in a room with the brand manager for Coca-Cola, they will get massacred. We know this. So whereas if they're applying for the engineering role, it's very different. So that's what I would say is focus on your skill set. Take a shot on yourself, apply for the job, right? If they say no, what's the worst thing that happens? They don't look at your resume, what's the worst thing that happens? And don't make any assumptions. I would have never, ever, ever applied for the job at Giphy Studios. I was approached through a recommendation. It did not fit what I thought I was supposed to be doing next. In fact, I took a pay cut when I came to Giphy Studios. And all of that was because I took a bet on myself. And in fact, when I took the pay cut, I said to the recruiting manager, back to self-advocacy, I'm going to take this pay cut and I'm going to come in here. And then a year from now, I'm coming for you because I'm going to prove that my value at this company. And that is exactly what happened. And then God bless Giphy, like, they're the type of place that responded to that.
I love it. I love your full throttled direct self-advocacy. That's amazing. I know if I would have taken a pay cut, I'd say, okay, taking this pay cut next year, we're going to talk about this, and you're probably going to regret this pay cut. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I hope it looks like the bet paid off, though, right, Sadie? I think
Absolutely. I mean,
right.
every bet I've taken has paid off somehow, and I think I'm one of those people that trusts my gut. I didn't have a plan. I just sort of went with where I felt like I was meant to be, and that has served me very well. If something rubs you the wrong way about an interview, if somebody says something that's just like, meh, that's not right, you really do have to trust that. Or the opposite is true too. If you're someplace and you feel like I can really learn from this person, then bet on that too.
I agree. I mean, it's never a bad bet when you bet on yourself. I mean, it just never is. So, so now we're in this virtual world. I mean, what changes for self-advocacy? Does it look different? Are there different techniques? I mean, tell us.
I think it matters if you're starting a new job in this virtual world versus you've already been there. The biggest change in my mind is just like, you only have to wear a different top. Like the thing that has come up for me is just change your sweatshirt. No one will ever know. But when it comes to self-advocacy, whether it's virtual or not, the question I always come back to is, are you making your coworkers and your boss's day easier? Full stop. If you are doing that, they will root for you, right? They will understand the value that you are bringing to the entity. And so whether that's virtual or not, people have a lot more autonomy. A lot of companies that said, I'll never go virtual, are now giving people the agency to go virtual and figure out if they can get their jobs done, figure out if they can still accomplish what they're meant to accomplish. And overall, it's a success from what I understand. So that's a big deal. That's a big thing, because especially for working mothers, for people with long commutes, for a number of different, for just a diversified workforce, so that you're not only recruiting engineers who can afford to live in San Francisco, it really makes a big difference.
Totally does. I mean, this whole idea around remote work is the next frontier for expansion of diversity. Diverse backgrounds, experiences, right? People can live where they love, which is something that I just fully advocate for, because life is too short. But now you have the agency and the opportunity to do that and still work for companies that you love as well, right?
For sure.
It's an exciting time. We'll see how this all plays out. So how about the last question before we take some audience questions? How do you challenge yourself when sometimes you feel scared or hesitant? Or Sadie, do you ever feel scared? Tell me a bit about that. How do you push through when you feel that wall?
So I will use the term self-protective more than scared. So I'm pretty good at self-protecting. And one of the things, ironically, given what we're doing right now, that for years I avoided was public speaking. And it wasn't because I was afraid to public speak. Clearly, I don't have an issue with the confidence in that area. It was the idea of me speaking on camera and it living in perpetuity. So I wouldn't even make a GIF for Giphy for the first year I was there. And a couple of years back, with the support of some team members at the company, I really wanted to get into this. And I mean, they'll tell you every time I am like, oh, why did I sign up for this? Why did I do this? But that was an area that I really felt I wanted to push myself. But the motivation was not only because I was afraid. The motivation was because the hesitancy that I had meant that only my team was benefiting from my experience. And that didn't sit right with me. So I wanted to talk about single motherhood. I wanted to talk about married motherhood, parenthood, working with, putting the PTA meeting on your calendar, making sure that you're constantly showing that there is a different model that works. And I can't do that talking to the same 100 people all the time. So that's what changed my mind and sort of the paradigm for me on why I would do public speaking. So I rarely do press that is specific to a job. I will do press or talk to people that will benefit them and the future, and teach somebody something and make myself available.
I love that. I love your reference around not necessarily being scared, but self-protective, right? Of yourself and your interests and your family, and your legacy ultimately. So, me on the other hand, I was definitely scared of public speaking. So you were good at it. I was the engineer that used to throw up in the base, in the bathroom before pitching. And so, but things have changed now. So you work
Good
through
for
it, you work
you.
hard. But yeah, I mean, it's we all have our own testimonies. That's right. Well, John, I'm going to throw it back to you for some audience questions. I heard there's some good ones.
Absolutely. There's some good ones from our mentees, our generation mentees sent in a bunch of great questions. Before we get them, we have more shout outs, people from all over the world. We've got Deborah from California, Desiree from Texas, Chad from Wisconsin, and Humera from Hong Kong. So there's our global audience, Judy.
Wow.
We're making a global impact here. So actually the first question I want to get to from our one of our mentees is, and it's about company culture, but I want to tie it into what you both had said a little bit earlier. Sadie, you referenced the story on entitled generations, which was, I think you're referring to that New York Times article about, millennial managers dealing with Gen Z staff. And there's that incredible anecdote that I will never forget, I think, for the rest of my career, which was some millennial manager brought up the fact that a Gen Z staffer who reported to them said something along the lines of, well, I finished my work for the day, and I have a yoga class at 3 p.m. So I'll see you later. So I'd love to get I'd love to get both of your perspectives on that in relation to self-advocacy and how a company's culture can play into that. Because if the company has that culture, that may be fine actually, but obviously the millennial manager who's complaining about it, it didn't seem to be in their company culture. So I'd love you both to talk about that.
Sadie, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, to me, the difference between entitled behavior and self-advocacy falls into the, this idea of asking versus assuming, right? So assuming that you can leave at 3 p.m. for your yoga class is not the same thing as talking to your manager about why you need yoga, right? That's self-advocacy. So if somebody comes to me and says, listen, I'm having a hard time, yoga really resets me. There's this great class at 3 p.m. that I'd love to take. Are you good if I finish all my work to leave early and go to that class? I'll say yes every time. But if you say, my work's done, I'm going to yoga, bye, I'll have a different attitude.
Amen to that.
And Judy, and you brought it up before. I mean, you actually brought up, because one of the things that companies are trying to do now in appealing to younger, more diverse staffers is to, like you said, encourage people to be their authentic selves. But there is a fine line, I think that Sadie was saying, in between being your authentic self and being an authentic self who happens to be a really good and valuable employee.
I agree.
By the way, sorry to interrupt, Judy, but don't be your authentic self if you're a terrible person.
Exactly.
I agree. You're awful.
I mean, you're awful. Right. Exactly. If you were not,
that should be in the job description. Yes. Go ahead, Judy.
You used to have don't be an asshole
when you're a kind person and a good human. Other than that, I need you to be someone else. No, I mean, look, one of the things that I've always said is bring your authentic self, but you can't bring 100% of yourself. I mean, there's stuff that we're all in a professional environment and we need to work together. But when I think about company culture, Sadie hit it spot on. A lot of times it's just being very communicative, saying these are the things that are important to me. I'm doing really good at my job. This is how I'm driving impact. It's measurable. I would like every Wednesday, if it's okay and it's not disruptive to the team and we don't have an important client-facing meeting, to take some time and go to the yoga class down the street. That is just fine, right? But it's all about context, timing, and methodology. And that's the way I approach it. And I think most reasonable managers would, whether it's a millennial manager or a Gen Xer like myself.
Speaking of managers, another great question from the mentees was, how do you effectively advocate for yourself if you have a boss who isn't the best people manager? That is a struggle. Either of you want to take that?
Yeah. I mean, I've learned as much from having terrible managers as I have from having good managers. My answer is mildly manipulative, but I'll go for it. The answer is learning people's reward
Get in the cab
system.
First.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Sabrina Schiller. It really is, learning people's reward system. And this is something as just a manager that's also really relevant. Some people want to be front and center with a talent facing job. Some people want to be quietly in the back running the engine. And I think when you spend the time figuring out, what does my boss value. If they value politicking, if they value, if they're terrible and they're, unfortunately not super people supportive, how do you make them look good, right? Like, how do you advocate for yourself in a way that your boss gets the win? And then you get to just get what you need to the next level. That's sometimes how it works. Like, we don't all have wonderful bosses who have our best interests. Sometimes they're just kind of assholes. And the reality of that is that when you're working for an asshole, you have to kind of play the asshole game or go work somewhere else. My instinct is don't work for assholes. In general, it doesn't work out long term. And what it'll do is it'll teach you things, but it'll teach you things at a cost. At a cost, a mental cost, an emotional cost. And generally, it's not worth it.
I love that. Don't be an asshole and don't work for assholes. I can't think of better advice. Judy,
that's the tagline to the conversation.
It's going to be hard to top that one. I mean,
we are on time. So, do you have any final words, Judy? Please.
I first of all, I want to put that on a T-shirt, so I'm going to order that up and wear it out and be a banner. Sadie's exactly right. My only thing is that, I always tell people when you're working for a bad boss, and you will have one. I had one early in my career. He used to curse me out and yell at me. He was quite temperamental. Two things. One, it's not you, it's them. Don't internalize their awfulness, their, whether it be, their terrible manager, they try to take credit for you. Don't internalize that. That doesn't reduce your greatness. But also, it's only for a time and period. I love the fact that everybody wants their team to make them look good, but also you have to build your network laterally, sponsors outside your boss. If they're that awful at some point, don't allow an awful boss to push you into a role or out of the company. That means they win. So you build your alliances, you build your board of directors, and you go forward. And then when you become a boss, don't be like them.
Well, guys, I can't thank you enough for an amazing and terrific conversation. We've taken up all the bandwidth, I think, on adage.com, but that's fine. And thank you guys for joining me, and thank everybody else out there for joining us today. And please join the conversation and track the progress of the list on the pages of Adage, adage.com, Facebook Elevate, and follow Adage the List online and on social media. Thank you for joining us. I'm John Diosa for Adage Studio 30. See you all next time. Bye.